This happened to be about 3 months after we moved into a new house, and the summer was coming to a close. Besides moving into a new place, it had actually been a pretty uneventful summer. The days were filled with boredom, and the nights were torturous, since it was one of those really hot summers, and the air conditioning system wasn't working properly. The previous owner of the house promised us that she would have it fixed by the time we moved in. However, it clearly wasn't on her list of priorities. Since the entire summer went by with no effort on her part to deal with it, she actually turned out to be a real piece of work. My mom and dad have been divorced since I was 3, but started seeing each other again right around the time we moved into the new house. One evening, after making several calls with no success, my mom found the contact information for someone who used to babysit me when I was younger. Her name was Maria, and I remember liking her because she had 2 kids that she would always bring with her. They were fun to play with, especially her older daughter Emilia, who was closer to my age. Maria was available to watch me, and I remember being excited when I found out that she would be babysitting me again. Of course, I insisted that she bring her kids. The following is a description of what happened from Maria's perspective, as told to my mother. I don't recall any of these events taking place while Maria was babysitting me. It wasn't until a few years later that my mom would even discuss it with me. My mom arrived home from her date with Dad to find Maria standing by the door clutching her children fiercely by her side. I was watching TV in the family room, completely unaware of my traumatized babysitter and her frightened kids. My mom asked Maria if everything was okay. Maria had tears in her eyes and a look of fear plastered on her face that immediately prompted concern from my mother. She told my mom that she would never come back to the house again, and went on to say that she had felt that things were off in the house as soon as Mom left for her date. My mom asked if I had misbehaved, and Maria assured her that I hadn't, and that I had actually been on my best behavior. She went on to explain what happened to her and her daughter. Apparently, a couple hours after Mom left, while I was in my room entertaining myself, Maria was in the kitchen with her son, and her daughter was playing outside by a huge tree that stood in the middle of our backyard. While doing the dishes, Maria was struck by the sight of what appeared to be an old woman hanging from a noose off of one of the branches of the tree. Her daughter wasn't far from where the woman was hanging. She was awestruck as she watched the apparition begin to lift herself up, releasing herself from the noose's grip. Maria said that the old woman approached Emilia, and after a short exchange, the woman took her daughter's hand and began to lead her in the direction of the side gate. Maria screamed for her, but did not get a response. Emilia seemed like she was in a trance and couldn't hear her. Maria ran outside and followed them around to the side gate. When she turned the corner, Emilia was facing her. Maria said her daughter was just standing there, frozen. She looked pale and sickly, like all the life had been drained from her. The old woman was also frozen, with her back against the gate, and her piercing eyes staring right through Maria. An oppressive silence hung in the air before giving way to Maria's screams. She yelled at her daughter to come to her, but again, no response. It was like time had stopped. Upon recounting this experience, Maria told my mom that it was like watching a movie and everything had become slow motion. Eventually, her daughter snapped out of it. Confused and disoriented, she ran towards her mom and proceeded to cry uncontrollably. During their embrace, Maria watched as the old woman evaporated right before her eyes. When learning of Maria's experience, it was all so strange to me, because I didn't see any of this, and I don't remember the screaming, I don't remember the crying, I don't even remember Maria or her daughter acting strange. By now, my mom has recounted this story to me many times, and to this day, my memory betrays me. I have absolutely no recollection of the events Maria described. Unfortunately, Maria never babysat me again. In fact, it was a couple months afterwards that we learned of Maria's passing. She died of a brain aneurysm. By the time we learned of Maria's death, we had already moved out of the house. The horrible story Maria told my mom was pretty much the final straw for us, and my dad was in the process of buying a new house in a nice suburb just outside Los Angeles. and he convinced my mom that we should try to be a family again. We were all together again under the same roof. I should also mention that after we left, the previous owner of the house actually moved back in. We then found out through a friend who lived in the neighborhood that she was found dead on the kitchen floor. One of her kids found her after not hearing from her in a while. She had only been living there a few months. What happened to her is a mystery to us, but it only adds to the dark mystique that surrounds that house. I have never been one to give much credence to ghosts or hauntings. I prefer to base my beliefs in what I experience, on the evidence that objective observation can bear out. However, that dreadful summer still serves as a reminder that there just may be more to those claims than I would like to admit. I was plagued by insomnia throughout my adolescence. This may have stemmed from the depression that came with being a target for bullies at my school. It could have come from the video game binging I used to do to cope with said bullying. After about 6 or 7 hours in front of the screen, my corneas would seem to have completely dried up. My problems with the outside world would dissipate when I played video games. When I turned off the console, the imperception would be replaced by red-rimmed eyes reflecting back at me. Then the long dark journey back upstairs to my room, attempting to hide my late-night gaming from my parents. My partially above-ground basement, where the TV room was located, always held the promise of freedom for me, or at least whatever that was to a relatively innocent preteen. Sleepovers, staying up all night with my friends, and of course playing video games. There was an attached garage and side door, which I told myself I would eventually sneak out through to do more adult things when I got older. I had been begging my parents to let me move into the unoccupied guest room down there for years. They stubbornly refused, convinced that I wouldn't get an ounce of sleep down there, neglecting the fact that I wasn't really sleeping in the first place. However, when I turned 13, they finally caved. I enjoyed the privacy and freedom of my new space. But the more time I spent there, the more I noticed it was a dark, unsettling place. The TV room lacked a window, so when I would have to make my way to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I had to rely on the moonlight shining down the stairs through the back door, or have to stumble through the dark TV room's light switch on the opposite wall. I tended to opt for the former, and the 3-meter dash from my bedroom to the bathroom was always terrifying. I would always imagine a figure looking at me through the back window, or shambling down the moonlit staircase. Head lolled back with mouth agape, impossibly wide, exposing jagged carnivorous teeth. With no lock on my door, where was I to seek shelter if such a monstrosity was to descend those steps? The darker parts of the basement may have been scarier still. The side door, once a harbinger of rebellion, sex, and booze, instead symbolized potential robbery and invasion. Someone could easily slip through it and lurk in the pitch-black confines of the TV room. Yet, the main contributor to my increasingly sleepless nights was the tapping sounds from within my walls. They weren't always there, only once every few days or so. The tapping would start at the far end of the opposite wall, by the closet under the stairs. It would quickly be answered at the opposite wall. Then ping-pong to the other side of the room. Systemic, but not rhythmic. Then it would go to the ceiling above my bed. After 3 or 4 repeats around the room, it would finally stop. The noise itself was unnerving, but the inexplicable sense of dread that accompanied it was what really got to me. All other sounds seemed to be muffled or absorbed into that tapping. No buzz of electricity, or the house creaking under its own weight. In the seconds before the tapping, every sound wave crashed to a halt, as if the room itself held its breath in anticipation of what was to come. With each successive tap, goose flesh would erupt on my skin, which made the temperature in the room drop a few degrees. Even after the tapping stopped, the cold feeling of unease did not dissipate. Every sound I wanted to make was too loud, and every sound I did make was an intrusion. How long could this last? Questions like this raced through my mind each night. My already abnormal sleeping schedule was becoming untenable. I told my parents about the sounds. Despite my insistence that the tapping movements could not be those of a pest or a rodent, that they were controlled, dull hits, rather than the skittering or scraping of tiny claws on drywall, my parents called an exterminator. But no squirrels or rats were found in the walls, no trace there had ever been. My complaints about the tapping noises soon became routine. They were dismissed as the product of an overactive imagination. One mid-February night, this all came to a head. I'd went to bed relatively early, too fatigued to do much of anything. As I lay looking out at the fallen snow through the room's tiny window, the feeling of unease, worse than usual, festered in my chest. It soon became a physical sensation, feeding off my unrest. The tapping started at the opposite wall. Jolting upright, I quickly turned on the switch of my bedside lamp on. My ears were ringing despite the silence, my heart pressed into my sternum. I then waited for the loud slap above my headboard, or for the room itself to cave in, anything. Birds began to sing in my backyard, yet it was still dark outside. I checked my phone for the time, praying that the first rays of sunlight would soon make themselves known. It was 3 a.m. The high, full melodies twisted into something more sinister, as the birds' chirping reached a crescendo. The ringing in my ears became a dissonant tone. The violent quaking of my door against the frame cut through. The force of the movement caused the wall to shake. Uncontrolled, rage-filled blows, like a 300-pound man was crashing into it. But whatever it was not human. My assailant would have been inside by now if it were. I had no lock on the door. I didn't have time to envision what kind of monstrosity could be on the other side. I had to act, but didn't have the time to consider what to do. I did what all terrified children do. I dashed for the overhead light switch, conveniently located next to the door. As my finger hit the ice-cold plastic switch, I realized how close I was to whatever was behind the door. Mere centimeters. I began to envision my own demise as the lights flickered on. The pounding continued for another couple of seconds. The birds were no longer chirping. However, the silence did not make me feel more comfortable. Footsteps would have cut through the stillness, but they never came. This meant to me that whatever was outside was still lurking behind the door. I put my ear to the door as softly as I could, trying to hear what was outside without being heard myself. There was nothing. After another few minutes of trembling with my feet rooted to the floor, I threw open the door and instinctively sprinted for the TV room's light. In hindsight, I see how stupid this decision could have been if someone had been on the other side. But I guess my teenager brain had accepted the potential risk and overall absurdity of the situation. With the light on, I saw nothing out of the ordinary in the room. I checked the side and back walls, peering outside. There was only the cool night air and the falling snow. My pulse slowed slightly, but my nerves remained on edge. Out of options, I went back to my room, resigned and deathly tired. I lay down in bed, but did not shut my eyes until dawn finally came. When I woke up, I walked around my yard and garage, not sure what I was hoping to find. Maybe tracks in the snow leading out from the back or side door. Maybe to get a comment from my parents about the commotion from the night before. But there was nothing. This outcome was actually more unsettling to me than finding tangible physical evidence. For the rest of the time I lived in that house, there was no more tapping on the walls. I still know now that I was cognizant and awake when the events of that night unfolded, yet I still don't know what to make of it. I've had a lot of experiences when I was younger. I was the type of kid who wouldn't be afraid of anything, like laying in the dark alone, watching scary movies, or hearing creepy sounds in the middle of the night. On a few occasions, my mom would catch me playing with my dolls around 1 a.m., and she would scold me for it. I don't remember when it started, but I would always wake up around 4:23 a.m., and it wasn't that there was any sounds that woke me up or anyone shook me awake. I just always felt the need to wake up around that time and go to the living room. My mom said that she would find me laying on the couch. There was one night where I woke up in my parents' room with no recollection of how I got there. This happened a few more times, but my parents didn't draw attention to it or say anything about it. A little while after, we moved to a new house. Many years passed, and I had just turned 19. My mom had a best friend who's been around since I was in diapers, and she had a daughter who was my age. Her name was Emily. One day we were hanging out in my room, and Emily asked me if I still remembered my old house. I said yes, and asked her why. And then she said, "Well, I was just thinking about when your mom said she heard crying behind the TV in your living room." I paused and looked at her like she was crazy, but she wasn't the type to make up stories. "Yeah, she would always call my mom and say that she was scared to stay home." She told me that my mom said I would get up at night and lay on the couch in front of the TV, and then I would wake up crying and screaming, telling my parents that someone was hurting me. It freaked me out when she told me this, because I didn't have any recollection of any of that happening. She went on to say that my mother would hear crying behind the TV, and it would always happen around noon while I was at school and my mom was home alone. I told her to shut up, because it was honestly scaring the hell out of me. It wasn't until I was 20 that I learned that there was a lady that stayed there 5 years before they remodeled my old home. She had a son my age that drowned in a pool across the street, and sometime after that she overdosed on pills around 4 a.m. She was later found dead in the living room. Ever since I found that out, I can't even spend the first night in a new home without having a priest bless it first.
There's always a reason to be afraid.